in 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Devos Outdoor, your go-to source for lightweight, portable, and versatile lighting solutions built for the outdoors and beyond. Whether you need scene lighting for public safety emergencies or reliable area lighting for your campsite, Devos has you covered. Their LED lanterns offer variable outputs and color options with Bluetooth remote controls that provide a complete ecosystem of lighting in a compact and easy-to-deploy package. These lights are perfect for camping, hunting, search and rescue, crime scene processing, and nighttime operations. Devos optimizes your experience and alleviates your pain points with extra power banks, solar panels, and more. Devos Outdoor ensures that you have long-lasting portable lighting no matter where you are. Check out their lineup at Devos, D-E-V-O-S, outdoor.com or find them on Amazon. Again, that's Devos, D-E-V-O-S, outdoor.com. This episode was also brought to you by Lowa Boots. Start your day off on the right foot with footwear that was designed for those who stand relentlessly in the face of adversity. I wear Lowa every single day, for miles on canine searches and for hours on tactical operations in inclement weather. No matter what, Lowa keeps me moving. Whether you run, hike, hunt, or fight, on the streets or out in the woods, Lowa has the gear you need to help you conquer whatever challenges you face. Go check out their new line of trail running shoes at Lowa Boots, L-O-W-A Boots.com, and get outside for some fresh air and daylight. Lowa, for those who know where they're going and won't stop until they get there. One of the things that I think we don't always do a good job of, and I know we've talked about this a little bit before on the show, is the separate efforts or intentions behind what a tactician does and what a strategist does. And Jim and I were having a conversation recently about whether or not we need more tacticians in the world or more strategists in the world. And we have lots of thoughts on this. But my argument fundamentally is that we've got to break down the silos between the two and maybe blur the lines a little bit so that we can work together and collaborate more. And so today we're going to talk about, do we need more tacticians or strategists? And how do we get more of both?
Or yes, why not both, right?
Yeah.
Like the meme. So a buddy of mine recently went through the National Defense University, whatever their irregular warfare program was. And she was telling me like, hey, I have this professor. He's really cool. His name's McFate. And he just wrote this book about irregular warfare. And Jim, you would dig this. And so I read it. It's called The New Rules of War. And the author, like I said, his name is McFate. And he made a striking point that in the last 60 years, we've had a ton of tactical victories, but we have very little to show for it, right? Like, yeah, we can kick anyone's ass in Iraq or Afghanistan or whatever, but do you feel like we've really got like the Middle East under control?
Yeah. Are we winning?
Does it feel like we're winning? Who's in charge, right?
Do you feel in charge?
Yeah. So he has a point. But he goes further to suggest that we spend too much time and effort making and promoting tacticians. And think about that. We really do. We encourage tactical thinking because we need it. We need you to be a tactically proficient person. But the problem is then we get tactical thinking. We get people who will apply a template to every situation, and they don't understand why that template exists or what we're really trying to ultimately accomplish. And we're not spending nearly enough effort selecting or grooming, so to speak, strategists, people who understand the architecture of what it is we're trying to do based on our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, all that stuff, right? And I see that even in my own job. I'm a staff weenie most days, so I'm sitting there trying to figure out how we're going to employ, in a big fight where I spend a lot of my time. And the guys I work with, a lot of the air crew guys I work with, they're not thinking about that. They don't want to have to think about that. They're thinking about, I'm going to nail my landing. I'm going to do this perfect ILS approach or this perfect tactical approach, and I'm going to land in my landing zone.
What target am I flying to?
What target am I flying to? What altitude am I going to fly at? And those are very important. We need people who can do that, but you also have to understand where you fit and how you fit into the operational strategic picture, right? That said, I run a podcast, as does Mike, called Tactical Tangents. So we kind of take this not enough strategist thing personally, but I got to acknowledge that McFate guy probably has a point. And is promoting tacticians encouraging micromanagement, where the guys who are really tactically proficient, we make them colonels, we make them police chiefs, we make them SWAT commanders, and are they wired to worry about how exactly I'm stacking up on the door, how exactly I'm, landing the plane? Is that a risk here? And that got worse, I would argue, with persistent surveillance aircraft. Because now my big boss can watch the feeds, and he can call me live on the radio and be like, "Hey Jim, what you doing with your airplane there? What you looking at?" So I'd worry about that. And I'd also worry about, do we have someone in your agency who's talking strategy? And does anyone listen to that guy or gal? And are they a high credibility person, or are they like the guy with all the ideas, the good idea fairy, and, go to the closet, count the pencils, and get out of our way because we have doors to kick in, right? And do we have someone in the military, when we have these big national security questions, wrangling the whole of government? The State Department, the CIA, all that stuff. Sometimes, but more often, no. I would argue one of the biggest problems we had in the last 20 years was we achieved jointness pretty well. We have a pretty solid joint fighting force in the U.S. military, but we have not cracked the nut on interagency. And I think if we look at law enforcement problems in the last 20 years, you see things like, well, why aren't we sending therapists out with the cops to go, do therapy things for these people who are troubled, or they need social workers, but they don't necessarily need guys with guns and handcuffs, right? And so I think we are struggling on the law enforcement side, or y'all are struggling on the law enforcement side, figuring out a whole of government approach to handling people in a criminal community setting, right?
Well, I think when we talk about the silos between tactics and strategy, Jim, you talk about the military side of things versus the State Department side of things, the intelligence side of things. And one of the problems when I describe that as the siloing of that, being separate efforts, is it becomes like a Swiss Army knife. Hey, I've got this problem I want to solve. Which tool do I want? Is that a State Department problem or is that a DOD problem? Which thing am I going to pull out on the Swiss Army knife when really it needs to be a little bit more like a plate with a fork and a knife. You need more than one tool working.
It's an everybody problem, a holistic, if you will.
Yes,
problem, right?
But there needs to be some working together. And this, when at my agency, we've come a long way doing this and working together with our hostage negotiators. So our negotiators have embraced the tactics side of things. It used to be that they were very separate efforts. No, just give us more time. We're making progress. And we're it's hour 7, dude. You're not getting anywhere. We're going to go kick the door now. And we've started to work better together. And one of the things that they've embraced, just as an example to illustrate this, is that the tactics can put enough pressure on the person so that they feel compelled to talk.
We can corral them, right? We can corral them toward the negotiators.
Right, because one thing we know to be true for the most part is if the person's talking, what they're not doing is hurting people or barricading further or coming, right? We call it verbal containment, right?
Yeah.
But the idea is there's some synergy that happens when we can work together and help them understand, hey, you are not totally safe. We want the bad guy in there to know, you're not totally safe right now. Just so you know, we've got options and I can keep those options at bay if you can look at me and talk to me and engage with me, right? And it's it puts them on edge a little bit, but it keeps them on their heels, because the last thing that we want to do is just have a one or the other approach. Right. And
so you'd conventionally call that carrot or stick, right? And you got to have both at hand, and
for that to
be
work,
credible. Yeah. The other aspect of that whole government thing is I have found it's easy to be well, that's not my job. That's not my lane. It's not my problem. Right. And one of my favorite lines from any movie ever is the movie Zero Dark 30, where the chief walks into the staff meeting room and he's like, look, if you think somebody else on some other floor has this under control, you are wrong. We are the people who have to have this under control. And I think having a sense of ownership, enough sense of ownership that you don't just assume somebody else has it under control, but you go get them and involve them and help get this whole of government approach moving.
Yeah.
And understand, like, sometimes the State Department doesn't move as fast as the military does. They're thinking about a lot of other things that we don't have to think about, right? They're thinking about economic stuff that, like, I don't know, not my problem, right?
But I think to your point philosophically is like, when we all embrace that from a strategic level, like we understand that we are in this together, that this is our collective problem to solve, like, and it's in all of our best interests to figure that out.
Yeah, bring them in, right? And we also have troops, and in this case, I say troops, but also cops, also individual community members who ignore strategy altogether, and they just assume someone else has strategy under control. Oh, that's the politicians have that under control. Like, have you met any politicians? They're not all expert strategists. In fact, I would argue that's kind of dangerous. We need to help inform their strategy. And Mike and I have very close friends and relatives who are academic experts, right? Those academic experts don't have a whole lot of operational experience or insight. They got grand ideas, but those grand ideas aren't grounded in operational reality. And so, like, one of the things we could be doing better is like talking to those experts and informing them so that we get better expert advice, right? And they can inform us and help us understand what they are seeing as far as trends and insights. So when I talk strategy, I worry that a lot of our police listeners are like, well, that's a military thing. That's not a police thing. Like, how does this relate to cops? And I'd argue it relates a lot to cops. I think cops tend to get stuck on this treadmill of like 1 meter targets. Let's get through the next traffic stop. Let's get through the next shift. Let's get through the next a-hole that's in my face in front of the Circle K.
One crisis at a time. Yep.
Yeah. So getting through this encounter, I don't always feel, as an outsider, like police agencies have much of a strategy. And if you do, maybe you could communicate it better. And rarely, if ever, do we see a regional or interagency strategy with regard to policing. And when we do, it's usually like you only hear about the bad stuff, my experience.
Yeah, so we could talk about like how we scale problems, tactical problems versus an operational problem or a strategic problem, those different levels. But even when you look at strategy, an individual agency can have a strategy. There could be regional strategies. It's going to be kind of localized because regions differ, right? But then especially when you look at like national strategy. And I think this is something that has been a hot topic in policing for the last 10 years or so. I saw an article just recently that talks about the illusion of national standards for law enforcement. So we've got these organizations.
I'm going to interrupt because I think this is a huge thing. When you are a cop looking out, you see big differences between your municipal agency and the sheriff department, or between the sheriff department and your agency or whatever, right?
Yeah. Or local and fed.
Yeah. And if you're a person on the street, it's the cops, right? Yeah. It's called outgroup homogeneity. Everyone who's different from you all looks the same, right? And I think people genuinely believe like the police agencies like answer to the feds, and like that's not how that works. That's not how the government works.
Yeah, so we've got these groups of people who have come up with these like policy recommendations and generally accepted best practices of some form or another. And they're making these policy recommendations, but they're not necessarily making it in a way that's feasible for all of the 18,000 police agencies in the country, right? Especially when a lot of this is coming out of like your highly dense, like metropolitan areas, New York, LA, Chicago, to give the impression that those people have a consensus with like Sheriff Bob out in the sticks somewhere. It's just those are different landscapes entirely, right? And I'm not just making a political thing. I'm talking practically. Like if you're telling me that you should have a group of people that could do real-time crime analysis and blah 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 blah, you've got agencies that can barely afford to pay it. They don't have enough budget to pay attention, like let alone hire a bunch of people to do stuff like that, right? So these recommendations, although well-intended,
we're working out of a mobile trailer. Let's go ahead and do Minority Report because your PhD told us to.
Yeah,
right?
I was having a conversation with someone about like doing more training in classes, and they were like, "Yeah, that's fine. We don't even have where are we going to do that? Like, we don't have a classroom to put people in. I mean, it's like a logistics problem like that, right?" So you've got like these think tanks and academics and a lot of well-intended, very smart people trying to give this blanket template of like, this is what policing moving forward should look like. But they're failing to account for like the differences between like there's 18,000 police agencies and everyone's doing something a little bit different, right? It's just not that straightforward to try to come up with a strategy that's going to fit everyone's thing. And taking that like a little bit further, you have to layer in some of the political stuff, right? Like if you think about creating policy for police agencies and the politics that comes with that, right? Certain things are just going to they're going to be a little seasonal, if you will, right? Trump has made a big part of his campaign on immigration stuff, right? That's no surprise. And that's quite literally on fire right now. That's a hot topic. There's lots of things on fire over that topic. But that's something that's, hey, for the next 4 years, that's where we're at. And in 4 more years, it might be something different. And you see policies and things get shaped just on things like that. Like the current events come and go, interest changes and wanes, and even just current events, right? Like people are paying attention to Ukraine right up until they're not. And now they're maybe thinking about other places of the world. And one of the other things that kind of like on the seasonal approach to things in terms of how we look at strategy and how they shift every couple years, even just like continuity, right? Like we have a lot of turnover at my agency, and every time I get a new boss, I know that I'm only going to have that boss for a few years before it's someone else. And so anything I want to accomplish in that amount of time, like has to be grounded in the kind of horizon that is 18 months, 2 years or whatever.
I either got to bring them on board or I got to wait them out.
Right.
And that is not a great way to like implement a strategy, you know?
Yeah. So like when you talk about like coming up with the strategy, there's a whole lot that goes into this just on the timelines of it. Right. And then all the practical stuff, like trying to get everyone on the same page is really hard to begin with, but there's a whole bunch of nuance to that.
Yeah. So that continuity issue also obviously is a huge thing in the military. Most commanders are only commanders for about 2 years. And it is what we try to overcome when we write doctrine. It's why we write manuals. Paper doesn't forget just because commanders turn over. And it's also why we set curriculum at professional development courses. We're trying to teach the next generation of leaders how to think about the problem and to develop a little continuity toward that problem, right? Grow it, don't keep flip-flopping it, because people have to plan around you. We are trying to baseline multiple generations of leaders to this paradigm that the rest of us are working in. That's what we're doing with professional education. And that's one of the reasons why Mike and I do this podcast, is we are trying to set a professional education baseline across law enforcement that I don't think exists. We're also trying to bridge the gap between academics and practitioners. I stole that line from the Modern Warfare Institute at West Point. That's kind of their byline, is they're trying to bridge the gap between special ops practitioners and academia. And I think that's a worthy thing. And I think there should be some equivalent in law enforcement. That's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah. Raise the baseline, right?
Yeah. And bridge it, right? Communicate on behalf of cops to academia and communicate from the nerds to the cops.
Yeah. Make sure they understand the bigger picture as well.
Yeah. So talking about strategy. Strategy at its core is figuring out what your goal is, figuring out what resources you have and what you're willing to risk or sacrifice to get there, and then designing an approach to achieve it. There are lots of ways to do it. We've had whole episodes about this in the past, It starts usually like you literally draw a little chart on a whiteboard with your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, your threats, and kind of work from there. So starting with your goal, what is the goal of law enforcement? Like, what's your purpose? Is your purpose to write tickets and generate revenue and give me a hard time because I went, 38 and a 35? Is that really your job? Because it feels like some cops think that's their job. Well, they're there to make the community safer. They're there to reduce traffic deaths, to make the community more law-abiding, to catch bad guys, to arrest the people who are breaking the law, right? Each one of those things that I just rattled off, those are different things. Making the community safer is not necessarily the same goal as arrest people who are breaking the law. And whatever goal you select, that your agency selects, that the political leadership over your agency selects, should drive how you think about everything downstream.
And this is the hard part when you're trying to think about strategy. Because it's really easy from a tactical level to be like A plus B equals C. Okay, you want less people speeding? We'll go write more tickets. But from a strategic standpoint, the hard part becomes defining some of this stuff and like ironing out what your goals actually are. So when you think about those goals or the questions that Jim poses, you have to qualify it a little bit, right? Because they're pretty abstract and they're not super helpful until you do. Like, what does it mean to make the community quote unquote safer? If you arrest more offenders, arguably the crime stats look higher because there's more people, right?
Messes with your numbers to do your job.
So does that mean if you arrest fewer people that crime has dropped? No. If you're basing it on the
numbers
reports,
aren't lying to you, we are.
Yeah. If you're basing it on the reports from the community, but because of staffing and whatever else, your agency doesn't respond to a lot of the lower level stuff, and those reports don't even get taken, and at some point people stop calling, does that mean that there is less of those crimes occurring? No, of course not. Like, to catch bad guys? Well, what do we mean by bad? Where do we draw the line between these are the bad guys we want to catch versus the ones we're okay with letting get away, right?
38 and a 35.
Yeah. And what does it mean to catch them? I would like to think that we don't want the crimes to occur in the first place, right? So is the goal crime prevention and deterrence, or is it just accountability for when people do something wrong?
And this is not just philosophical, just to be really clear, not a philosophical thing at all. The California Highway Patrol for my whole life has made a big point of using marked police cars. And just in the last 3 months, they went public saying they're switching to low-profile police cars. I hate low-profile police cars.
Yeah,
just personally, viscerally, I want my cops well marked. Just as a taxpayer, I want that. But consider they're applying a strategy because they're looking for aggressive drivers, and they did, to their credit, explain their strategy. But that's where the rubber meets the road on this. Is like, do you mark your cars or not? Do you put 2 people in the cars or 1 person in the car? Like, those are operational level decisions in support of a strategy driven by your goal.
Right.
And it's all connected, right?
Yeah, and here's the kicker. In law enforcement especially, we have lots of goals. And those goals
do all the things all at once with no resources. Good job.
Yeah. And complicating that is like sometimes those goals will conflict with each other, right? So let's say traffic safety and community relations and being responsive to the community are all parts of the goals of a police agency, right? Traffic safety is important, community relations important, being responsive, all good things. So let's say a homeowners association has a meeting, and the residents at this meeting are complaining about people driving like jerks in the neighborhood when the kids are out playing. And there's an Officer Snuffy, goes to the HOA meeting because his boss told him to. It's his beat, it's his sector. He said, hey, there's an HOA meeting. I want you to go and, answer questions and be responsive, right? Okay, cool. And people are complaining about the people driving like jerks in the neighborhood. And so he says, hey, boss, maybe we can get the motor cops down there to go do some more enforcement to address the people the complaints, right? The community complaints of people driving like jerks. Well, who are the motor cops going to go give tickets to in that community? Often residents of that community. So maybe not the ones that go to the HOA meetings, right? It's not the Karens that are probably going to get pulled over per se. But no wonder no one likes the HOAs. Anyway, I digress, but you can see how by addressing one person's problem,
you're making a problem for someone else.
You become adversarial for someone else, right? And so like those things compete with each other. And that it's really hard to find balance, right? And it takes, it takes a lot of things, just leadership at its core. But when you're goal setting, that's tough.
And that's politics, right? Is you want to enforce your rules on someone else, but it's not fun to have them enforce their rules on you. And who do we put in the middle of this? Officer Mike.
Yeah.
Right? We make it your problem.
Yeah. And this leads to another kind of goal-oriented distinction, and it has to do with priorities. When you have a high murder rate or violent crime problem, there's probably going to be some political pressure to address that. Reasonably so, I would argue. But if we're being honest, in a lot of cities, I would argue that most people day to day aren't the ones out there getting in the gunfights. Right? A lot of
Except in Texas.
Bad guy on bad guy crime is responsible for violent crime. Not all of it, right? There is stranger danger out there for sure. But a lot of the day-to-day stuff, like people aren't getting in gunfights. So while you're focused on this violent crime problem, and for good reason, if people are getting killed, what's happening is you're deprioritizing a lot of the lower level quality of life stuff. And the day-to-day stuff that get to people is like when their house gets broken into and you don't show up, or when there's a disturbance and you call and no one addresses it and no one ever shows up, right? Like the loud party that they can't get turned down. That quality of life stuff goes away because everyone's busy dealing with the other priorities.
And of course, that also just feeds into a narrative about cops. And, they're not there to help you. They're there to make your life hard. Right?
And now your community relation goals.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I was on the receiving end of this as a disenfranchised minority. So about 15 years ago, I'm not, just to be clear, I am the man. So about 15 years ago, I was a groomsman at a buddy's wedding, right? Big military wedding. And he asked me to arrange the saber arch, right? So you make a tunnel with swords and the bride and groom walk through. And I was road tripping home with a case full of swords. And these swords are, they're big and they're expensive. They're kind of commemorative items. And they were borrowed, which was a problem. And I stopped at a hotel in Vegas, and I in the time it took me to check in at the hotel, which actually it was less than 5 minutes, someone had thrown a rock through the window, stolen 6 of these sabers. They were sitting in a gun case, which to me was like to protect them. But it was a gun case. They could see through the window. My bad. So these things are expensive. They're distinctly marked. They're very clearly ceremonially marked, and they have sentimental value, right? Like I said, I borrowed these from dudes. And I called Las Vegas Metro PD, and I was pretty irritated to learn that not only were they not sending the entire CSI crew from the TV show out to investigate, they weren't sending anyone. And so I called them back a few times, right? Like, this is a big deal for me, and I'm trying to get it resolved. And I tried to explain the situation. Eventually I got in touch with the detective, and he's a smart guy, and he's like, Jim, we've got 21 active kidnapping cases today. Which one of those do you want me to drop to come investigate your car break-in? And okay, I got it, right? The resource constraints of the real world are going to drive a lot at the end of the day, and they're going to affect you if you're on the receiving end of these crimes of misery, the car break-ins, the house break-ins, someone still steals your TV, that kind of thing. So that resource decision, that's super obvious to our cop listeners, right? But if you're the one getting your car broken into, it's probably not super obvious. Like it may not have occurred to you at all that if you call the cops, they're not going to show up. And you probably assume that if you're going to get robbed, the cops are going to come handle it. right? And you probably don't distinguish robbery from burglary from car breaking, whatever, but like point stands. So consider, kind of separately from that, in this resource constrained environment, what are your resources? What is a law enforcement agency's resources? And there's a long list of things that you could include, but really it comes down to people and money. We're always short on people and we're always short on money. My life would get so much easier. Just give me more dudes. Well, no shit. You don't get to throw up your hands and say, Jesus, take the wheel, because you're undermanned. You should do something about it, but you don't get to throw your hands up.
Yeah, and this is becoming a big thing in law enforcement right now. It's becoming a cop-out, frankly.
Yes.
And I'm hearing this from other sources, but I also just see it in action when I talk to my bosses about stuff, and it's like, yeah, dude, we don't have the money. Like, and at some point we have to be creative and figure out how to problem solve, because this is just the reality that we live in. And we can get into, when it comes to strategy stuff, a good example is going to be like recruiting and retention efforts. You have this idea of ways you want to solve problems, but it's just not a simple problem to solve. How do you get more bodies, right? Like, and that comes with funding and all these other things. But what you can't do, and what strategy can't be, is like the throwing your hands up, being like, well, we're short staffed, so we're just going to tell everyone to fuck off. Like, that's not good enough.
Yeah. And with the money you've got, you got to consider return on investment, right? So with the money I have, do I give each officer $1 more per hour? Which is, that's a decent raise, right? You're going up $1. Or do I buy little like fidget spinners with the agency logo on them to give out at high schools? Like, which one is actually going to help your talent management? So it's not necessarily the stuff you would think. Sometimes literally it's like a massage chair. If it's a token that shows we care about you and we want you around, it actually may make a big difference, right? Too often I have seen money go toward t-shirts no one wears, fidget spinners, little stress balls, pencils, and nothing that actually impacts your bottom line of number of humans, right?
And that's hard. That's hard because, like, sometimes you've got enough money to do something like that, but not something more meaningful.
Yep.
You have to be creative.
You got to spend it this fiscal year, and you got to do a bunch of other stuff, right?
Yep. Maybe that's
maybe
that's the strategic thing that needs to be addressed, is the fiscal part of it, right?
Yeah. Also consider, when you're building your strategy, what are you willing to risk and what are you willing to sacrifice? As a leader, as a cop, you're constantly making risk decisions, right? Consider the question of, do I put one cop in a patrol car or two? I'm pretty sure nationwide it's almost always one, with some exceptions, right? Mike, do you know of any like agencies that always put two in?
I mean, that used to be a big LAPD thing, if I remember correctly. I don't know if it still is or not, but I know that at one time was the thing, but I don't know these days. I mean, staffing has changed so much.
Yeah, so that's a risk decision, right? It's probably safer to always have two. You can watch each other's back. You got one guy who can drive and one guy who can focus on everything that's not driving. But what are you trading off for that, right? Your trade-off is you have half as many cars driving around on any given shift, right? So the challenge is deciding when or where you would want to double up cops. Now, as for strategy, I want you to think also about the risk decisions that criminals make. They are constantly making decisions based on perceptions, not necessarily reality. I want to emphasize that. Perceptions. What do they think is going to happen? They develop those perceptions from hearing from their families, hearing from their bros, watching TV, watching social media, living their life experiences. And you might call that, if you're a student of Boyd, an orientation, right? It's the lens through which they look at the world. And they're constantly going to try to assess which crime activity is worthwhile based on the payoff versus the probability and severity of getting caught, right? They're making is the juice worth the squeeze risk decision. You are trying to influence that risk decision. This is information warfare. Are you allowed to do that to the criminals? Yes, you are. Okay. So take, for example, Should I rob a bank today? Well, that's going to have a higher payoff than breaking into a car. But if I rob a bank, the feds are going to come looking for me. The bank has a cluster of countermeasures that are well known, dye packs and cameras and the little like height stripes on the door to make that harder to get away with. And so you're probably going to get caught. So is the juice worth the squeeze? Hopefully no. You're not going to rob a bank today. But hey, you're not going to deal with any of that if you break into a car. You're not going to get as much, but you're also probably not going to get jacked by the cops, right? Consider DUI. Drunk driving might get you a DUI or a car wreck, but if we're being honest, probably not, right? Lots of people drive a little buzzed. Raise your hands if this applies to you. Have you ever driven a little buzzed? All the time. And nothing bad happens, right? Until it does. When you have a couple of drinks and then drive, you're making a risk decision, right? You go to Applebee's and you have a beer with dinner and then you drive home. You're making a risk decision. If you go to Applebee's and you have 5 beers with dinner and drive home, you're making a risk decision. And by the way, you're making that decision while impaired. So we try to make it easy to get an Uber. We try to advertise sobriety checkpoints on holidays. And we have ad campaigns to remind people, hey, there is a cost and hey, there is a likelihood we're going to catch you, right? Another example is, what's the word? Child sexual assault material, CSAM. The community of law enforcement, as I understand, is trying to move away from the term kiddie porn because that implies some level of consent. There's no such thing as consent when we're dealing with kids, right? The penalty for that is off charts high, right? You're going to go to prison. You're going to go to prison for a long time. And oh, by the way, society kind of understands that if something bad happens to you in prison, no one's going to shed too many tears over it, right? So that's one step short of a wood chipper, okay? But people still do it. Why do people still do it? Well, the severity is crazy high. Why would you ever do that? Because the perceived probability of getting caught is still pretty low across those people, right? We have not effectively dialed up the sense of risk, right? So where am I going with this? If your goal is a safer and more law-abiding society, you need to build a strategy that is based on influence, not about number of arrests, okay? And that influence is about shaping the perception of the potential offenders over the probability or severity that they're going to get caught, right? The probability and severity is too high to outweigh the benefit of doing the deed, doing the crime, right? And I want to emphasize, again, it's a big deal. This is a perception thing. It's not even necessarily reality. You're allowed to lie to them, okay? But if you hide the enforcement or you hide the penalty, you're not going to influence the decision-making of the bad guys.
So an example of this that Jim is talking about, there's been a number of studies that have dealt with an approach in crime reduction called the pulling levers intervention. And it's been shown to be effective in some ways, and it has to do with essentially pulling every available lever to throw resources at a problem, a hot spot, or depending on how you define a problem, which I'll come back to in a second. But essentially making that perception of, let's just say, misbehaving at a particular intersection, right, to be the consequences to be perceived higher. And it could be all kinds of different specific interventions, but the idea being we're going to throw every resource we have at this and making that sort of known, like as a strategy, right? Where this takes me is when you address a strategy and you're trying to come up with a goal, right? Like to fix a problem. One of the hard parts when it comes to defining that is just appreciating all the complexity to it, right? So there's a group, we'll say, that does it's the Center for Evidence-Based Policing, and they've looked at they've studied a lot of these interventions in crime reduction stuff, And if you go to their website, one of the first most apparent things I think that you can get from this is the way they describe, they have a thing called the matrix. And I could put a link to it. But this matrix essentially looks at police strategies or practices that have been evaluated or studied or researched, and they're categorized based on a number of things. One is whether they're proactive or reactive. One is, if we're talking about in terms of level of effectiveness, whether it's specific or general. In other words, yes or no, it reduced crime at this intersection where we were having a problem, versus yes or no, this could reduce crime at any intersection, specific or general. And then it also deals with things like, are you trying to influence the behavior of an individual, of individual offenders, right? Or of groups of people, let's say particular gangs, or a micro place. I use the example of an intersection, or let's say a bus stop, or a particular hotspot, or an entire neighborhood, or an entire jurisdiction, like an entire city, right? And where I'm going with that is, when you're trying to set a goal and come up with a strategy, and you're trying to hone in on the complexity of the whole thing, right? And say, like I mentioned earlier, when we we want to make the community safer. That's a great goal, but it's not, what do they say? SMART. Specific, measurable, attainable. What are they all? How's it go?
Reasonable. I don't know. So
time oriented.
Yeah. I actually really like this matrix. And the reason I like it is, if you're the one developing the strategy and you're trying to communicate to your cops, to your shifts, what it is you want them to do, this is a common language through which you can do it, right? Do I want you to focus real narrow geographically, or do I want you to focus wide? Do I want you to get out of your car a lot, or do I want you to wait to receive a call? Yeah. Do I want you to go after one dude, or do I want you to go after like a community, right? That is a matrix through which you can communicate a strategy down to the practitioners.
Yes, and that's part of the thing, right? In terms of goal setting, is like making them specific, right? And one of the other things about this is measuring effectiveness. So I mentioned things like, and that's the whole SMART goal thing that I was getting at, right? Like specific, measurable, time oriented, whatever. Yeah. Like, how do you measure effectiveness in something like this? The community safer, like what is the metric, right? Is it number of arrests? Maybe, but not necessarily, right? So being specific in that, I guess the point that I'm trying to make there is just to appreciate how complex some of these, it could be really hard to isolate and narrow down the variables. And when it comes to strategy, like recognizing how many different efforts can be happening at once to impact those things. What is the role that you can play? And I think Jim talks about, like, what do I tell my guys to do? What do I want you to do today, right? That's where strategy only really matters. Goal setting only really matters if it's relevant to the practitioner and the tacticians.
So Mike and I joke about the line, like, we don't catch the smart ones. Every time I send him some funny video on YouTube of, some dumbass getting arrested, he's like, we don't catch the smart ones. So usually what we really mean when we say that is the bad guys should have understood the risk better, right? Like, their probability of getting caught was way higher than they thought because, they did bad guy things. But also, maybe we, the community, maybe we law enforcement, maybe we everybody could help the bad guy understand the risk better. Maybe I don't need twice as many cops. Maybe I need to make them twice as visible. Maybe I need twice as much social media engagement. Maybe I need the cops I have to make twice as much contact with the community, right? Perception is the reality. So, consider that. And this is also a thing in the military, right? Like, when we talk about deterrence, how do we deter Russia or China or, aggression somewhere? I'm reasonably convinced the whole world knows we can bomb them, but I want to convince them that not only can I bomb you, I can find you. I know exactly where you are today, right? There's a deterrence aspect to that. So what does this mean for us slimy civilians in the community, us community members, us Karens? Well, It means the police are resource constrained. And realistically, they're not going to keep your car from getting broken into. They can't. They do not have the resources for that. No matter how rich you are, no matter how nice your neighborhood is, it's not a thing the cops can prevent. Okay? It means you, the community member, bear a lot of responsibility for your own safety and security. Now, does that mean you should, sit on your driveway with a shotgun every night? No. But it puts more of a requirement on building up a community watch mindset. And whether you have a formal community watch program is a different story, but at least a mindset of it, right? Get your neighbors involved to keep the petty misery crimes out of your neighborhood and build up some herd immunity. And we've talked about that in other episodes, right? Our home security episode. Half of that is keep them out of your neighborhood in the first place. That way they stay out of your bedroom. Okay. And related to all of this, Mike and I have debated broken windows theory, and that's become some sort of like a trigger word over the years about, what's the word? Woke policing or anti-woke policing or racist policing or whatever. And broken windows is one of those things that's like the 21-foot rule. Like it started out as an idea and then it got warped and mutated into something totally different, right?
Yeah, so overly like concrete. Like it became this overly kind of,
And that kind of goes full circle, right? Like people want a template that they can just apply every shift. And that's not how broken windows works. It's just an idea, right? That term has a specific meaning. And I know it's going to conjure certain images like going after folks for really minor crimes, right? Or going after the poorest people who are in the most desperate situations. But I want to explain what it means to me. If a dirtbag sees broken windows in a neighborhood or just other signs of decay, he sees opportunity. His risk picture changes, right? The odds that he's going to get messed with by the cops goes down, right? He sees opportunity. He sees a place where no one's going to call the cops. And if they do, the cops might take a while to show up. That's going to affect his risk picture. So an overlooked part of broken windows theory is that the community has to do some of the enforcement. The community has to sort out the windows. I don't expect Officer Mike to come give you a citation because your window's broken. I expect if your window's broken that you do something about it. And I realize that's easy for me to say sitting in my, suburban home and stuff, but still, you got to do something. And you don't just go after the guy, you got to fix the window. You have to make the neighborhood look like somebody gives a shit. That's the goal, right? You create the herd immunity that way. So just an example of what I mean by this. I used to run a bombing range out in the southwestern United States. It was huge, right? 77,000 acres of prairie. And we were very concerned about trespassers. We had a problem with people coming on to steal stuff. We had a problem with people coming on to poach animals. We had a problem with people coming on to take pictures of military stuff that we didn't want them to take pictures of. So one of the things that we did was we regularly followed the perimeter fence all the way around. Part of that was just to show presence, right? Do cops ever show presence? Yeah, when you park out in an obvious spot, that's what you're doing. The other reason we followed the fence line was we were looking for evidence of trespass because we wanted to do something about it. And also find if the fence was broken. And if it was, we wanted to immediately fix it. We did not want to leave a gap for an extended period, right? And it was not unusual to find a no trespassing sign, big old U.S. government property, visitors subject to search sign. If we saw it shot up, we immediately replaced it because we didn't want to give the appearance that this was a derelict place, right? Where no one was going to notice the scavengers or the poachers or the watchers. We wanted to make it clear, we were going to notice, and things were going to happen to you if you did that, right? So broken windows theory to me isn't just a policing thing, it's a community thing. It's honestly, it's the stuff you do as a community member to harden yourself in a lot of ways. So I need you to figure out how to get your community involved, get them rolled in and help adjust criminal perceptions. If your car is broken into, are you going to bother calling the cops? Well, you got to create a social norm in your neighborhood where we will always do that, right? If a neighbor sees somebody walking driveway to driveway, touching door handles, are they going to take a picture of that guy and share it around? You got to create a social norm. Like, yeah, that's a thing that we do. Are you, as a community member, fighting to get cops enough resources that they can spare someone to come take a report? Like when you go to City Hall, to city council meetings, to county council meetings, one, do you go? And two, what do you say when you get there? And if you want more cops, you got to demand more cops. That's part of it. You're part of the community. You're one of the taxpayers. You're one of the voters. So do the things that get you the resources that you need.
So I want to address some of the broken window stuff, because I think this is a really good example of all the things that we've been talking about, kind of overarching example of a lot of this. And Jim covered it, but just to kind of reiterate, the broken windows theory, and that's what it was a theory. I think it was originally came up in like the late 60s, and I think it was really acted upon more in like the 80s. I mean, this is... there's a Wikipedia page. It's a theory, much like gravity is a theory, relativity is a theory, right? Evolution is a theory. So the idea is that signs of disorder will attract more disorder. And it will also cause people, like, you know, an unattractive place is not going to cause people to want to come out and participate, right? They're just going to kind of stay away from it and stay inside. And so a community doesn't really thrive in that sense. And so that's fine. Like, that's a good theory. It's a good idea. It's a good starting point. But what happened is, I think somewhere like around the 80s, New York, I want to say, was probably the first one, took this theory and they leaped it over. They took a big cognitive leap, a big jump to make that a crime fighting or crime reduction strategy. And philosophically, what essentially boils down to is, like, if you fix the windows, then the crime will reduce, right? The next leap that we took, the next stepping stone that we jumped over to, was like, okay, well, what does that look like? And it meant, well, what we need to go target these low-level offenders, you know, the hooligans that are throwing rocks through the windows on these big buildings, right? These abandoned buildings or whatever. These kids that are out just doing the vandalism, graffiti, throwing rocks through windows, that sort of thing. These low-level offenses, and
selling loose cigarettes. How dare you? And
we need to go, littering, just all those, like jumping the stills, the subway,
turnstiles.
There. Those sorts of things. It was go target the low-level offenses like that, because that is the thing that's contributing to the greater crime problem, right? Well, that's problematic, right? Because now you're not fixing the broken windows, right? And granted, like, we're oversimplifying the theory just a little bit. It's not about necessarily fixing the windows so much as decreasing the disorder, right? Like, you're trying to have more kind of law and order. But by targeting the low-level offenses, you're going to those areas, right? And real quickly it becomes like you're just targeting the poor people, the lower class people. And it becomes discriminatory. Like, throw all your cops at those problems to try to reduce the crime. Now, somewhere in there, people started looking at it and they saw a crime reduction and they jumped to like, oh, it worked, right? The problem is other areas that weren't doing policies like this, because New York did it and then others followed suit and also enacted policies related to broken windows theory. And those areas, some claim that they saw some crime reduction, but the problem is a lot of cities that didn't have broken window policies also saw crime reduction. So the point is, it's too hard to study and pinpoint the effectiveness of something like that, because it's a multifaceted problem. And there's just way too many variables to try to nail down the causation and correlation to the broken windows strategy, low-level offenses, lower income areas, right? To say that was actually what happened and that actually did any good. So the thing about that is, as a theory or an idea, when it comes to those practices, it hasn't been proven or disproven. Maybe it does have something good to say, right? But we don't know. and it's too hard to tell. It's too hard to narrow down. So what I want to address when it comes to strategy is the leaps that we took, right? The need for critical thinking, the leaps that we took that went from, hey, these academics had this idea about broken windows and low-level crimes and signs of disorder, and so we took it and ran with it. We said, oh, okay, we should go fix the windows. And that means we should go arrest more poor people. We just took a lot of jumps there, right? So we've got to be a little bit more critical in our thinking. And part of strategy, to Jim's point about getting the community involved, is strategy has to be multifaceted, right? It is one thing to say, hey, we've got these cops and we're going to target these sorts of crimes or these sorts of offenders. That's one part of it. That's one angle. But strategy, bigger picture, means, okay, how do we get the community more involved and more engaged on certain problems? And how do we get even the offenders, right? How do we incorporate them and other elements of the criminal justice system and other elements of, the mental health, social workers, all of those things, right? Yep. So strategy has to be you have to account for all those multifaceted efforts, right? And here's the big kicker. I don't necessarily think it should be every cop or tactician's job to think strategy. We should leave that to the very smart, talented experts in the field. But it only matters if those smart experts in the field can make those recommendations in a meaningful way, in a practical way to the practitioners, right? We have to make sure that we break down those things and say, hey, if I'm going to come forward as the expert or the academic and say, I have this theory or idea, people are going to take that and run. And with that power comes a lot of responsibility. So the tacticians, I need you to think about the complexity of it and say, hey, before you just take this idea that you read in an article one time and make it your new practice every day at work or for your department or your agency, maybe slow down and consult with the experts. And when the experts, if you're listening, are writing stuff like that, understand that cops are going to take...
If you say broken windows, they will literally go handle the broken windows.
21-foot rule, right?
Yeah.
And so I need everyone to step up their game on the critical thinking and communication aspect of that, right? Yeah. And I know everyone is well-intended. I'm not trying to throw stones at, cops for not thinking critically enough or for experts for not dumbing it down enough. That's not the point, right? The idea is we're trying to bridge the gap between tactics and strategy. Right? And those should be separate but parallel efforts. And there should be collaboration. And what I need the tacticians to understand is their role is like the strategic corporal, right? And part of this, interestingly, is a lot of police leaders, chiefs and stuff, on paper, their job is to think strategic. But I find a lot of times they're involved on a much lower, tactical type of level of thinking. Yep. And I don't know if that's just how we choose police leaders or how they come up through the ranks, right?
That's how problems come to them, right? If you're a strategist, it's the tactical problems that are going to boil up for you to deal with.
Yeah. But I really need people to kind of think both ways on this, right? I need the strategists to think at that level, like Jim is saying, but also I need tacticians to recognize how strategic their role can become. We've talked about the idea of the strategic corporal. Think about the Army infantry corporal shoots some person at some village and it creates an uproar and it has a strategic impact on the region and the efforts in the region. Cops have a similar thing, right? George Floyd, right? You have one incident that one guy perpetuates or a small group of people perpetuates, and that has an institutional impact, right? And another term that I heard just recently was street-level bureaucrat, recognizing the role that frontline workers can play in the impact of people day to day, right? Your job affects people's lives. You arrest somebody, that's going to affect their life, right? You call Child Protective Services or whatever version of that you have in your area and get kids removed from a house, that's a big deal. And you've got to recognize like those layers of impact that you can have at that lowest frontline level. That's really, really important. So where I think that becomes problematic at a strategic level is when there's like a misalignment of values or vision or goals or the mission between the front lines and the executive leaders or even the community, frankly, right? Like the people that are out there like judging and forming opinions. So the last piece on this that I want to hit on in terms of like bridging that gap between tactics and strategy, it goes back to a rant that I've given 1,000 times, I think, at this point on this show about lowest common denominator training and lowest common denominator stuff in general, where we try to dumb things down for the frontline people. And I hate that philosophy. I think if we want people to step up their game, we need to teach them and bring them up to that level. But one of the things that happens is we don't communicate some of the strategy really well to those frontline people. And I don't know if that's because we're trying to dumb it down, but like if you want them to understand, you got to explain it. And
this came up at work recently. I gave a presentation trying to explain like, hey, this is the operational reality. This is how we're going to fight in, whatever theater, whatever future war. And one of my guys is like, Jim, don't use more words when less words do trick. And I'm like, that's true, but buddy, I need you to stick with me.
Yeah.
I need you to try.
Step up your game, dude.
Yeah. Like maybe at some point we need to not expect our line operators to be dumb.
Yeah.
I don't like, there's a certain level of caveman beyond which like, I need you to actually use the front half of your brain.
Well, and you're also, first of all, I think it's frankly just disrespectful to lower level people when you don't assume that they have a growth mindset. And from a leadership perspective, that you don't try to instill a growth mindset, like teach them, challenge them to grow if you want them to do better. And that's part of this is like, I want my strategists out there to have some empathy and appreciation for the tactical and the practical implications of these things. And like, if you want people to do better, then help them do better. Use that brain of yours, all that into like, there's some really smart people tackling these problems and they mean well. Now I just need them to like work a little bit harder on making that relevant for the rest of us. Because if you only keep it up here at this high level, it doesn't ever permeate to the front lines, right? And I also need those tacticians to recognize like, and that's where I get into like, this is my sphere of influence is my peers. And I need all of us at that frontline level to make sure that we're doing our part to see the importance of strategy and where we fit into the big picture. And notably, that collaborative effort between both levels, tactical and strategic, like us collaborating and working together and having empathy for each other is where like we can come up, that creativity happens, the spark happens and innovation happens where like, let's say a really smart idea or theory comes to light and now we can translate that in a meaningful way, not make those cognitive leaps that we talked about, but actually make it meaningful and worthwhile and effective, right? That's the environment we need to foster.
Yeah. So if I had to summarize where we are, where we're going, I want you to consider that even when you're an operator, trying to get through a shift, trying to get through an encounter, that you are part of a bigger strategic picture. And then an awful lot of that is an influence picture. Okay. Most criminals are not super villain, evil geniuses. Most of them are human beings who are trying to look for an easy win, an easy fix, an easy payoff to get their next fix, and they're making a risk decision. And so there are things that you can do to change what they think is going to happen if they break into a car, or if they break a window, or if they steal a car. And anything we can do to help that is probably worth our effort, our constrained resources, our money, our time, our manpower. Okay. And consider you are always going to have constrained resources. You're only going to have so much money. You're always going to be short on people. So what do you do with them? And that's a fundamental leadership management thing. And I've said this before on the podcast. I hate when people say, you want to be a leader, not just a manager. Like, bullshit. You got to be both. Okay. Yes, you have to be able to motivate people and inspire people and get your big idea into their head. That's important. But also, don't waste their time. Okay? So if the big strategy for your town is like, hey, we have too many pedestrian fatalities, great. Think strategically about how you're going to affect that. And you might be surprised. There might be some options that you haven't considered. And if you're in the community and you're one of the pedestrians who doesn't want to get hit by a car, maybe there's some things you can do on that front. Okay. I think that's all I got. Mike, what do you got? I called you Jim. You're not Jim. I'm Jim. You're Mike.
Yeah. I'm not that handsome, unfortunately. I think what I said there at the end is what I got. It's having empathy for the importance on both sides of the table and the importance of just coming to the table. Like, I think there needs to be more collaboration between the bosses and the leaders and the strategists and like the people on the front lines. And I know that's hard to facilitate sometimes. And, you know, staffing and resources can be tight as they are, but like we have to stop making cop-outs, right? For stuff like that. It's time to innovate. It's time to problem solve. And that's where the rubber meets the road.
That's the game. All right. Be safe out there. Be smart out there. We'll see you in the future.
All right, guys, that's all we got for tonight. This episode is brought to you by 09 Holsters. We talk a lot about people, ideas, and hardware on this show. So when we invest in equipment, we always think in terms of experience first. 09 is helping you figure out how to carry the gear you need to be effective. They are built by cops, for cops, with a minimalist design and bomb-proof durability. Radio cases, flashlights, body cameras, even canine remotes, you name it, 09 has been filling a void in tactical duty holsters for more than a decade. Go see what they offer at 09 Holsters. That's ZERO, the number 9, holsters.com. 09, built to win the fight.
And this is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by ManusX. We've talked a lot about the tactical fantasy on this podcast, and one of the quickest ways to break your tactical fantasies and actually improve your performance is by getting real feedback. One of the ways you can do that is with ManusX. You're not going to get better at shooting on your own. You need practice, data, and coaching. And you need to make the most of your ammo with good live and dry fire training. Manus is a family of training devices that tracks you while you train. It times and tracks everything you do in a drill and coaches you as you go. It is indispensable to taking your shooting to the next level. Go find them on manusx.com.
Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we're doing, you can head over to Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. That money's going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you could find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are at TacTangents. You can also email info@tacticaltangents.com. All right. That's all we got. Good talk.